We're back for section 3, which is strategize. In this section, we are going to talk about emphasizing, minimizing, and this is the stage where you would normally determine, what type of template you want to use based on your work history. We will talk about the actual templates and getting into constructing those in another section. But during this stage, typically once you know all about templates, this is where you would kind of determine what kind of template do I want to use. So we will move on here to part of the strategizing. And so that is determining which things you want to make sure are included in your resume. As we talked about in the last section, when you analyze your work history and the job description, that will help you determine which puzzle pieces match, which things you're definitely going to want to include on your resume. So you've identified those things, but you now need to also think about what things do you want to emphasize? What things do you want to really make pop on your resume? So typically what we'll see using an example of customer service is, this person worked in customer service here, they worked in customer service there. And so, yeah, you see all of the places they worked in customer service, you see what they've done in customer service, but to really make it pop and emphasize, you want to think about things like characteristics or skills or accomplishments. That's going to make them really stand out and show that they not only have done customer service before, but they excel at customer service, that they would be a great asset in customer service. And so, those skills might be interpersonal skills. It might be the ability to build rapport or the critical thinking skills and resolving problems. So think about that a little bit more in depth as to what makes somebody really great in customer service or whatever type of job that you're looking for in your skill set. Ask yourself, what would make somebody in my position or the position I'm wanting really excel in this line of work? What are some additional skills or characteristics or accomplishments that might give me a little boost and say, not only have I done it before, but I excel at this. And so that's the stuff you want to think about. So, some things, that it could be, for characteristics, it could be your ability to empathize if we were doing customer service, for example. You might think about some of those accomplishments. So maybe you're recognized at your last place of work because of your excellent customer service skills. Maybe you were in the top 10 of something, what kind of accomplishments you have that would say that you're really good at this. And if you're in sales, for example, maybe you want to use some of those quantifying numbers to show that this is an accomplishment of yours on your resume. So think about the things that are going to really make your resume stand out as somebody that excels in this area. On the flip side, though, sometimes you want to think about the things that you need to minimize, things that might potentially hold you up on your resume, or maybe, just might be able to get your foot in the door a little bit easier or better if these things were either left out or if they were minimized. And so some of those things typically include, for most people, overqualifications, job gaps, and age. So I'll talk about each of these things a little bit more in depth. So overqualifications, that can happen, especially if, you were in a particular career and maybe you're ready to kind of step back into something more entry level because you really just don't want that responsibility anymore. And so I hear that quite a bit. And if that's the case, then you want to, minimize your qualifications, because otherwise they're going to wonder, why are you applying for this type of work? They're going to think you're not going to be happy with the job or the pay, and so forth. So example I might give, let's say you were a manager and now you don't want that responsibility. You want to be just an entry level customer service type job. Okay. So, instead of talking about coaching and developing employees and um, all of the things that you might do more on the management side of things, coordinating schedules and all of that kind of stuff, maybe you just talk about your customer service skills. Maybe you talk about your data entry skills. Maybe you talk about, them on a little bit entry level kind of range. And that's what you would need to do to kind of show that you're not overqualified, or to make your resume not immediately kind of have a red flag. Okay. And job gaps. So job gaps typically is another thing that tends to come up a lot, whether that is because maybe incarceration, or maybe you were a stay-at-home mom, or maybe you were a caretaker for a time period of parents or children, and so had to be out of the workforce for a little while. And typically, job gaps, may be looked down upon, from an employer, and they typically, want to see those job gaps filled in. And so there is a way that you can hide job gaps a little bit on a functional resume, which we'll talk about in the next section. However, sometimes it's just better to go ahead and explain the job gap. And so depending on your situation, that's what you're going to want to determine. Do I put on here that I was a caretaker during this time period, and kind of the skills that I had? Because remember, some of those skills are transferable. So maybe you were the transportation between appointments and activities and et cetera. Maybe you did administer medicines, and maybe you did cook and you cleaned for this person, et cetera. And so you might just put that during that time from here to here, you were a caretaker, and these are the things that you did. So that way it doesn't look like you weren't doing anything during that time period. If it was an incarceration, for example, sometimes people do end up putting on there, maybe they had a job with the state of Kansas, and maybe they put those dates on there. Or maybe they do want to try to hide it a little bit, and they want to do that functional style resume, which we'll talk about later. And so typically you want to try to minimize those job gaps the best that you can, whether that's the type of resume you use or filling in those job gaps, as we mentioned. The other thing is age discrimination. Not supposed to happen, but it does. And so there's some things that you can do on your resume to minimize your age. So that way, they don't just look at the paper and throw it away. That hopefully you get an opportunity to sell yourself. And so some ways that age can be shown on a resume, a lot of times in the summary of qualifications, people might write over 20 years experience in XYZ. You don't want to do any more than 10 on that. So instead it would be over 10 years experience in XYZ. All right. Another way is going back more than the 10 years on your work history. So typically that's why we would recommend only going back the 10 years. But sometimes, as mentioned in one of the earlier sections of this, you may need to pull from some of that work history because it's relevant to the job you're getting ready to apply for. And so that's where it's going to come down to the style of resume. So when I talk about the different styles, I'll show you a style that you can kind of dig a little bit further back in your work history and get it on your resume without showing your age so much. And then another way that sometimes age is shown on your resume is even with your email address. So think about your email. Does it have a number at the end that could be related to like a birth year? Even if maybe it's the number of your basketball jersey, but if it looks like it could be a birth year, they're going to probably assume it's a birth year, not that it's your basketball number. So think about the numbers you put at the end of your email. Also think about your email service. So like if it's AOL, they assume you're older. If it's sbcglobal.net, they assume you're older. Hotmail, they assume you're older. We really recommend using a Gmail account. And so that's just something else to consider on there as well. Some other things that might show age is like technology. So if you use some of these older programs, like computer programs, and you've got them listed and they're not really in use anymore, well, that's probably not relevant. That's probably something you can remove because by adding it, you're also showing your age. So think about things that could potentially show your age on your resume and try to minimize those the best you can. Again, it's not because they're not going to see how old you are when you go to that interview, or they're not going to, realize it at some point, but it is to get your foot in the door so you have the opportunity to sell yourself. And so that is going to kind of really wrap up that strategize phase. And we are going to move on to just kind of some general information with the resume and application, and also what type of resume template styles there are. And so we will do that when we come back.